All right. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to today's Survivor Circle session. I'm Becky Perkins, a survivor support specialist at Zero Abuse Project, and we're very glad that you've joined us today for an important discussion about shame, the master emotion. And I'm very pleased to welcome back Rick Goodwin to be our presenter today. Just a quick note about how to participate in today's session. First of all, if you're attending, you are not able to share your video or your audio, and that's for your safety and your privacy. However, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment at any point during the presentation, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. In doing that, you have the option to direct your question or comment to everyone, which would include Rick and everyone who's attending, or just to Rick. So you have that option when sending a question or comment. And again, this is being recorded today, so if you need to step away for your self-care or for your schedule, please feel free to do that. The recording will be available on the Survivor Space website and also on Zero Abuse Project's YouTube channel after the session today. So without further ado, I am happy to turn it over to Rick. Good afternoon.
Well, thank you, Becky. It's good to be here once again, and happy Friday afternoon to one and all. Today we're going to be working on shame, and in the work I do, and I think I probably need to just anchor that, and I will in a minute, but the work I do, I work primarily with men around trauma recovery, and in that regard, I work at a clinic, mental health clinic in Ottawa, Canada, and where we've done dedicated work with male survivors now for a good 20 years. Today we'll look at the notion of shame. It is one of many emotions, of course, we can hold in our life, but when it comes to the harm experienced, particularly from childhood abuse, childhood trauma, there's one difficult emotion that stands front and center, and that is shame. To the point that for a variety of good, solid reasons, we refer to shame as being the master emotion. So we're going to be looking at the post-traumatic expression of sexual abuse through a shame lens, so we can get kind of a handle on it. The more we can build our awareness of this particular aspect of our emotionality, the more it can be a focus on to transform the shame response. So that's a task today. That's the goal of this discussion. So as Becky said, as I go through this, love to hear your questions, love to hear your commentary. And it doesn't all have to be at the end. If there's something I'm saying that you would like more detail on, maybe some reference I'm making that's not clear for you, please take the time to post that comment or question in the chat, just so that you can get the most out of this time on this subject. So shame, the master emotion. And we certainly always need to recognize that this is, Survivor Space is a service of the Zero Abuse Project, but in particularly the funding base for a lot of the work here is from the good people of the Office for Victims of Crime. And without their funding, this would not at all be happening. So appreciative of the folks at the Department of Justice in their support of the work of the Zero Abuse Project, particularly Survivor Space. And again, that allows us to all be here today. So that is all good. Shame. This is what we're talking about here. And it seems like such a notion that such a difficult emotion can be linked to childhood. different ways to define shame, but that sense that of an inherent badness within oneself. This is what we will need to reflect on. So it needs to be delineated so we can have a laser-like focus, not only on shame, but also to know what happens when we feel shame. What goes on for the person who experiences shame? And I'm going to throw this out right off the bat here. There's an assumption that we make, and like all assumptions, it can't be said as a certainty. But the assumption we make is that if one has experienced childhood trauma, childhood sexual abuse, childhood physical abuse, other harms towards children and youth, this is where shame comes from. So we'll make reference to the point that being a survivor, being someone who has that lived experience, makes them shame prone. So of all the myriad of emotions that could be tapped into by that individual, shame will be prominent. And we're going to look at why that is. And what are the historical roots of the shame response? Here we got the little boy, and I hope it's all photoshopped with a variety of words to suggest about it, a shaming of males. Looter, rioter, arsonist, violent, deadbeats. Can't read them all. But yeah, what it's almost like a dump. It's the weight of shame outweighs all other emotions, and it makes people do particular things. This is what we need to look at today. So there's different interpretations, different definitions of the concept of shame. We're going to be talking initially about two presentations of shame, but let's go with the definition first. Shame is one's own vicarious experience of another person's scorn. Okay, so there's something that goes on the outside that happens here from another person, and then as it's targeted to the individual takes it in, and it becomes their own. So here we can talk about a phrasing, a concept that we can borrow from Gestalt therapy, if you've ever heard of that model of psychology and psychotherapy. And the expression I'm thinking of is that particularly as children, by default, children swallow things whole, meaning that if they have an experience, if they are given a message, particularly from their caregivers, mom, dad, whoever, people in authority, so in this regard, we could include teachers or religious leaders or whatever. And if they are getting messages like they are bad, those messages get internalized, and they get internalized without any processing, without any screening, without any selection. Children do not have the capacity to say, oh, what my dad just told me, I liked what he said here and I liked what he said here, but I don't agree with what he said elsewhere. Children don't have that ability to discern. That's a skill set that we develop as we get older. But children and youth, by and large, they swallow things whole. So if a child is told they are being bad, they internalize the message that they are bad, and then they truly believe they're bad. And this is part of the root and part of the weight of this entire topic. Shame is the basic emotional response to the loss of interest or attention by a significant other. Now we're getting into how shame may play out in our adult relationships. It doesn't have to be just like a romantic or partnered relationship, but it's probably a good area we can, see the expression. If we are shamed by a stranger, that's one thing. If we are shamed by someone who we're in a relationship of love, of safety and trust, yowza, that's a much more significant injury that we can all experience. And so sometimes we'll need to discern where these messages came from. How old were you when you first experienced shame? Who said those words to you, knowing that they become internalized? This is some of the process that we need to go through on this subject. Shame creates a deep sensitivity to experience badness in oneself, both internally as well as externally. So let's just flesh that out a little bit. Like all emotions, emotions are an inside job. Generally speaking, if I was in deep shame right now, you may not see it because I'm not necessarily expressing it outwards. Possibly if a camera was focused on my face, it could pick up certain micro expressions of emotion that I'm not even aware of. But in essence, we don't see shame. What we see is expressions or behavioral responses of the shame state. And in this regard, I'll be mentioning in a bit core shame responses that we observe in the work we do with men who are survivors of trauma at our clinic. I'm just going to go around the circle here. The shame response may be established before the sexual abuse occurs. If this is your lived experience, it would only make sense that you situate difficult emotions like shame as, they must have started when from the experience of sexual abuse. And so what is the suggestion here is that may be true, but it also may be true that the shame state has been established much in your much younger days. It doesn't necessarily link to the sexual abuse. Now, speaking of guys, which is my knowledge set, the average age of guys being sexually abused is between 9 and 10. So the question is, well, how early can a shame state be established? Well, I'll tell you of a fellow who I worked with a number of years ago as a client, and he came into a program. He was a military member, had a family, partner, a straight man. He had a couple kids, and he was from the same community, the same city. He grew up in the same city that he lived, which was here in Ottawa. So his parents were still alive, and this is an important aspect to the story. Now, when he came in to the clinic to work on his trauma recovery, he referenced an experience of sexual abuse by his uncle that occurred maybe at around age 11 or 12. The uncle didn't live with the family, but would occasionally visit from out of town. And this is where the sexual abuse occurred. And this fellow believed that he's got to work through the issues of what happened with the uncle in order for him to experience healing, experience recovery from those wounds. Now, he came into the program, and there's lots to say. There's lots to say about that. The incidents with the uncle, I don't know if it was one or there was a number of occasions where he was abused. We talked about dynamics in his relationship with his wife from the abuse. We talked about his life goals and what he was planning to do once he retired from the military, all that kind of stuff. But here's the angle to the story given our lens on shame. It became apparent that this fellow was wounded well before that age. And we only found this out through a little side story he shared with the circle, in which when he was a little guy, well, I'm going to back up a little bit. His parents, still alive, still in town, would often be family get-togethers where he and his wife and kids, and I think he had another sibling in town, and they would meet up with the grandparents. So 3 generations all getting together for a big meal. His mother would often make as a family joke that when this guy was small, um, when he was just learning to talk, his first words he ever said was dada. Now, dada, mama, we know that's no doubt for most kids, the first words they will speak. And let's keep in mind that children start using words maybe around 12 months, some more, some less, but pretty tender years to say the first word. The second word this fellow ever said. Now remember, I'm taking this from the family joke that his mother would say in front of all the generations. The second word a little Bobby said was bad boy. And when my client spoke like that in the circle, I mean, I had the reaction, but other guys had reaction too, which was like, whoa, 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 what was that about? So again, the mother said, as a family joke, haha, here's this 1-year-old, and the second thing he ever says is bad boy. So it didn't take too much work to unpack really what all this was about. But think about it. How many times when he was a baby would he have been told that he was a bad boy to the point that it would become the second word he would say? Was it a dozen times? Was it hundreds of times? We don't know this, but for my guy, this was such a key aspect to his story because his abuse, his trauma expression didn't have all to do with the uncle. It was established in him a good decade before when he was a toddler. This is the power of shame. This is in part why we call it the mastery emotion, because it's such a deep emotion. It can be instilled quite young. Now, I want to say this just in terms of men. The conversation about shame for folks of all genders, that's not the issue. But given my particular experience in working with men, we can look at some aspects of masculinity and how boys have to comply to the codes of masculinity if they want to be successful at growing up to be a man in the conventional, stereotypical, successful image of masculinity. We can say that a number of the ideals of masculinity are next to impossible for boys, male youth to achieve. And while that's a separate teaching, what those ideals are, I'm going to say this is that when it comes to our gender coding and whether we are successful at that or not, we're talking about the idealized self. And the idealized, masculine expression was you tough it out alone, and you're a big guy, and you hold yourself higher than other men, and you have a very comfortable relationship to aggression and violence because that's part of masculinity, and that as part of masculinity, you do not take on any attributes of what could be considered feminine. It's the job of the boy to disown that part of himself, kind of get rid of that part of himself, just like any qualities that could be associated with homosexuality. Being the idealized male man, and still in Western society is one of being heterosexual. So there'd be a disowning process as well. And you put you throw all that at somebody, and there will be inherent shame because no man can achieve all those ideals. And so, most men are going to be down here in terms of their lived experience, the idealized experience of being man is here. That space in between creates shame. So we got a lot of factors to look at with shame. Now, I want to make a division of sorts of the two kind of core types of shame, but let's just, for the record, make sure we're not confusing elements of guilt with shame. Guilt is an emotion that comes up when I have done something wrong. Shame is emotion when the wrongness is me, myself, not my actions. And there we start the delineation between the two. So the first bullet, it's developed in early childhood, most often pre-verbal, just like my guy. This is it. Shame starts earlier than guilt. It's only until maybe ages 3, 4 that children can feel guilty about putting their hand in the cookie jar before dinner. And guilt is a big emotion as well, but shame can start off so much younger. Research scientists have filmed shame responses in clients and in kids, much like my client, age 1, age 2, age 3. What happens when we feel shame? Now, if we feel guilt, let's say I was late today and to the webinar, and because I have a connection with Becky, because I value her in my life, I no doubt would be quite quick to say to Becky, "Oh, Becky, I'm so sorry I'm late today. It doesn't matter the reason, it's just not right. And I apologize for any, hassle, headache that's caused you. Next time we do this work together, I'm going to show up like 10 minutes before we have to be on, just so that this won't happen again." So I'm going out of my way to say that to Becky because I'm feeling guilty. And guilt, then, we can see the purpose of guilt, which is to help social cohesion. My expression of guilt to Becky will hopefully prevent us from disconnecting in terms of our relationship. It will, hopefully allow our connections to continue. That's the purpose of guilt. But when one feels shame, there's not that reparative element to it all. If one feels shame, the reaction of the shamed person will essentially be to disappear. Now, we disappear in different ways. Let's just say everyone on the webinar today, we were all in person, and we're in a room, and let's say it's a party sponsored by Zero Abuse. So we're all having fancy drinks and little snacks and whatever. And I come into the room, and there I am. I'm coming in the room for the first time, and someone sees me out of the corner of their eye, and they go, "Ah, look at Rick. He's flying low." And as that person says that and points to me, other people will stop talking, all look towards me, and they will start laughing too, because my zipper is undone. Now, that experience, what do you think the odds are that I'm going to want to continue partying with you guys, or for the next party that I'll want to hang out with you? Not very much, because that's what happens when we feel shame. We want to disappear. And yet sometimes we don't disappear physically, we disappear psychologically. So same situation, you guys are at the party, I'm coming in, as I enter, someone points at me, look at Rick, he's flying low, and then everyone turns and starts laughing at me. Now, if I said as a reply, yeah, that is funny. I'm kind of a dork in that regard. I often do stupid things like that. Yeah, it's completely whacked. Now, if I said that about myself, I'm still physically present with you. But boy, oh boy, I am really, I've disappeared. Any sense of my integrity, my authenticity, all goes out the window. So I can yuck it up just like you folks in the shaming response to me. Okay. Shame, two different types. One is situational, just like I said, the party situation. That we can learn about shame that way, but there's something going on with child survivors of abuse. So let's get into that. Um, First of all, this quote, and this is a mishmash of many guys who say this in group in therapy. I know it's the responsibility of the person who hurt me, and that it's not my fault. They're sharing their thoughts here. So why do I feel so bad about myself? Like I brought it on. I made it happen somehow. There's guys really struggle with this at times. Sometimes I think it was all about me. Like there was something about me that led them on to abuse. Was it my looks? Was it how I carried myself? This is what happens when people feel shame from such an early age. So, in that regard, then, well, why is that? Why is it that the survivor adult says, I know I wasn't responsible, yet they still feel shame? That sense that they're damaged, that they're losers, that they're inherently bad, that they're not worthwhile in this world, that they have nothing of value to give. We can look at three ways why this might be so deeply instilled in children. First one is social learning. Um, this is probably the simplest of concepts, and yet lots of merit to it. When that person is abused, obviously they're abused by someone bigger or older or both. Um, and in the process of being treated like dirt, the party that is offending, the one who is the person who is abusing, may also make many comments, disparagements about the person they are abusing. So the kid then is not just hearing messages from their offender, but also knows that this whole situation is so horrible, and yet they're trying to figure out, well, this guy must be right because he's an adult. We're supposed to respect our elders. He knows more than I do, so maybe it's true. Maybe I am a piece of crap or whatever is said. So we can take the concept of social learning, that the words and the interpretation of the experience of abuse now becomes internalized for the child and swallows it whole and then makes it his own. That's one theory. Here's another one. And I'm not saying it's one or the other or the other. It could be a mishmash of all of these at place. Social dynamic understanding. So let's get back to when we were kids, and everyone on this call, we were all there, okay? When we were small, we only saw the world from our own eyes. Now that sounds simple and basic, but with children, they have no other choice. So when we were born in this world, when we popped out, first of all, when we were in utero, all our needs were met, and we were at one with the universe because from food to warmth to love, we were experiencing that all inside our mother's tummy. And then when we were born, it's like, wow, this is a pretty cold world out there, and that child's most immediate task is to survive. And part of survival, they had to delineate, well, where do I end, and where does this entity called mom that I'm learning, and this entity called dad, or whoever it is, they have to learn there's distinction. Not everything is at one like it used to be, and that they have to express their needs to get their needs met. So the child learns wah wah wah, may bring a warm bottle of milk. Great. For the child's experience, they made that happen because they can only see the world through their own eyes and their own experience. Another time, wah, 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 and they get their diaper changed. And again, the child will experience this as, that they made all that happen. If the child learns to turn up the corners of their mouth, they get this lovely cooing response from these big entities. Again, the child made that happen. So this, I don't want to call it selfish because that's not the right word, but a self-orientation, a self-oriented lens to the world is how children live, how children grow. So you may have heard the saying that, when a child first hears that, say, his parents are getting a divorce, what happens to the child? The child internalizes that as saying, oh, I must have said something, I must have done something. They're divorcing because of me. And again, we hear that, but we can understand it now because this is how children engage in the world. So when that child is abused, how else can that child understand the cause of all that apart from that they brought it on? Just like the warm milk, just like the fresh diaper, just like the cooing response, just like the divorce. They made it happen. So then the badness is within them. Okay, last one then. Just watching our time here a little bit. We know for throughout any experience of danger, the human response to danger is to essentially freeze. Well before fight, well before flight, or any other expressions from the danger. Just like the deer in the headlights or the possum playing the possum, animals freeze. We're social animals, we freeze. And yet there's something very disowning if one's body does not do what one wants to do. If one's body does not respond in the way that would be logical to respond. Because if a kid could run away from the abuse, then he wouldn't have shame because his legs got him out of a situation he didn't want, or if he could fight his way out of it, same thing. But invariably, children, like most adults, freeze in a situation of danger. So the narrative, the self-talk to that person is, well, I must have wanted it because I stood there like an idiot. And here we're seeing, I'm going to call it body betrayal. A disconnection with one's body and one's bodily responses because it's not in keeping with wanting safety in a situation of danger. Could this also be the origin of the shame response? Lots to think of there. And again, we don't have to compete between these theories. Maybe it's a combination of all three that makes shame truly the master emotion than any other response that survivor may have and that may continue in that survivor's life way into adulthood. We know post-traumatic stress behavior does not necessarily fade with time. So post-traumatic stress symptoms, behaviors, could go right through the lifespan unless attention is given for a process of recovery, a process of healing. Before I go to that, so just to finish off, as I said before, I work primarily with men who've experienced harm when they were children, sexual harm, physical harm, sometimes from the family, within the family, parents, mom, dad, older siblings, whoever, and sometimes, of course, not by family members. When we're working with men, we teach, part of our work with guys is to teach men this stuff. We talk about 3 shame pathways. So I'm just going to mention them because our time is running out here today. The first shame pathway is that we know that a lot of folks who've got problems with drinking and drugging, funny enough, have childhood trauma. This understanding, awareness is building more than ever before. Before it used to be, addictions is one thing and childhood victimization is another. No, I mean, why would someone have such a over-reliant relationship to substances that numb them out unless there's a deep pain that they're holding? So we talk about drinking and drugging being one of the shame pathways of how that individual may show shame as he gets older. Another shame pathway we can talk about is with guys that they're not all survivors, but many survivors move quickly to an anger response. Anger as it expresses into rage, as it expresses possibly even into violence. That's another shame pathway that we spend time on with the men at our clinic. And the third pathway, again, just to mention it, is that shame may well impact questions or doubts or problems in terms of the fellow's sexual identity, who they are, and sexual expression, how they do it, how they have sexy time with other people. And we can't say every sexual issue or question or problem has to do with trauma. That wouldn't be right either. Our sexuality is pretty unique and pretty nuanced. Plays components to the expression of all that. But for guys who are survivors, this can also be a really big topic. So sex stuff, we call it sex stuff because we don't know if those questions or concerns have to do with trauma or not, but we need to talk about that stuff regardless. So there you go. At least for men, again, I don't speak about working with women, but we talk about 3 particular shame pathways of how the shame is expressed with that individual as throughout the lifespan: alcohol and drugs, proneness to rage, and thirdly, issues of sexual identity and expression. So I think at this time, I'm now on my last slide. I am on my last slide. Happy now to turn it back to you, Becky. Maybe there's some comments or questions that have come in. Let's see if we can get any dialogue going in our last time today.
Thank you, Rick. I've just got my audio on here so folks can focus on you as the source of the answers if they have questions. So nothing in the chat yet, but obviously folks feel free to type in any questions or observations that you have, things that you've noticed, in your own life, your own journey with others that you're familiar with.
Yeah, so if I can just add to that, Becky, I mean, if you're attending today and you have lived experience of harm, particularly in childhood, well, how do you resonate with this topic of shame? Do you sense it in your body? Are you aware of it in your mind when your emotions shift to that state? And then secondly, if you do have connection to that felt emotion, is what happens to you? If shame is the heaviest emotion, then something has to give. No one can walk around in a shame state without having weight, impact, or a coping behavior that might be anything to numb out or to distract oneself from this heavy emotion. So this is all important reflection work. Again, if you have the lived experience, or you have a loved one with this pattern of reactivity.
So Rick, I'm not sure if you can see the comments, but
No, I can't. Just how my screen up here.
Yeah. So the comment, although very early on my journey, I came to know it wasn't my fault intellectually, but I truly carried shame within my body physically for many years.
You are not alone in that self-reflection. Thanks for commenting. So can shame be held in the body? Of course it can be held in the body, even though we normally define it as an emotional state. But yeah. So there's disconnection there. Your mind is saying one thing, your body may be telling you a much different thing. And how do we find resolution to that? That often comes up with the clients I work with. Now, how can one escape this pattern of having a shame base. And even though that, well, I'm going to back up a little bit. You know, this should be a core piece if you're in therapy. This is a big piece to chip away on. Mind you, the shame response can be quite stubborn. So even though that you know you shouldn't feel shame, that doesn't mean you don't stop experiencing the emotion. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm a big believer in group work, group therapy, but this is where I'm going to say is probably the best way to bust shame. Um, and that is being in group. And this is what I see, that in any group of survivors, that compassion is fairly quick to show. You know, the guys are quite supportive with each other early on. You know, they say, you know, I've got your back. I understand where you've been. I've been there too. They call each other brother. It's quite a moving expression of compassion for each other. And yet later on in the healing work, you know, say the fellow's still in group, he comes to an aha. And this is not just an idea or thought, this is like a deep aha. And it goes something like this: how the hell can I be so supportive to all these other people, but I can't do that to myself? And I think when that aha is said, that's when we can really watch the dissolution of the shame response. And I think group work allows that so much more, because we need to hear from other people with lived experience. And if you just situate yourself in an office with an individual, like a therapist, that's going to be helpful for sure, but it may not be as moving to break through the shame response as when you are with, you know, 10 other people with the same lived experience. So that's my reflection of ways to kind of get through this if this is a monkey on your back. Certainly counseling. And then the notion of groups, peer support groups, therapy groups, online groups. These are all ways we can develop connection and fellowship with folks who have also gone through the journey that you've gone through. And that might be the best ticket to break the shame, which is to just deeply feel the shared humanity in that circle or in that group. Back to you, Becky. Is there anything further in the chat?
Nothing else just yet, but thank you for that. I was thinking that as you were speaking before you got to that point. It feels like it's a universal experience that we are so quick when hearing other survivors speak. We're so quick to be like, it's not your fault. You have nothing to be ashamed of, but it takes so much longer to accept that for ourselves.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. This is I mean, as we know, this is to experience trauma recovery, you know, to experience healing in your life. This is a long game. Despite promises made by perhaps some individuals and some therapeutic techniques to recover from childhood wounds, is a long journey. And yet, you know, it certainly can be done with patience and with work and by being vulnerable. If you can be vulnerable in relationships of safety and trust, which would describe a therapy relationship, would describe a group context. If you can be vulnerable and find yourself in that kind of community or atmosphere, this deeper work can certainly be had. And the outcome, I truly believe, you can learn to live to have a happier and healthier life by doing all this work.
And thank you for facilitating that or making that available to people, especially men. And I kind of had a question related to that. So in your work with male survivors,
Mhm.
do you find, I mean, I'm sure that shame is a universal response, whether male, female, any other gender, any context of abuse. But for male survivors, do you find that there is maybe added layers of shame or greater difficulty overcoming shame depending on the context of the abuse? You know, whether it's in a family, whether it's another male who abused the man. Are there any kind of context things that complicate shame for male
Yeah,
survivors?
great question, Becky. Um, so let's go back to the notion of betrayal, okay, a body betrayal. So when your body doesn't do what you want it to do in any situation, and therefore it becomes a oppositional energy. Some men develop hatred to their body. And again, folks of other genders no doubt too, but the two forms of body betrayal, one is universal, the freezing response. So any kid, any gender, any culture, freezing response is going to be what invariably will be first and foremost. There is shame resulting from that. When we talk about guys, another element of shame is in terms of sexual arousal during the abuse or the assault. Now, we do know that victims of sexual abuse, sexual violence, often are aroused during the abuse, during the attack. Men do that, women experience that, boys experience that, girls experience that, people of all genders. The issue with men is because our genitalia, our plumbing is external to our bodies, it is very evident, not only for the boy or the victim himself, but also for his offender. So in, it plays two roles. One is within the victim himself. It's like, what the heck, what's going on? This is a horrific experience I'm just going through, and yet my body is telling me otherwise. What's that about? That causes a shame response. And another element of the shame response from sexual arousal is that the offender, regardless of their gender, will say, "Oh, look, you're enjoying this. Look, this is consensual. Look, this is not abuse." And here, I think it's a double whammy for men, because male sexual arousal is so much more evident and obvious as compared to female sexual arousal.
Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments or observations? Feel free to share those in the chat.
Becky, could I do my plug for 1 and 6?
Please do. And I don't know if you have information about it on your last slide, maybe you could.
Oh, I don't. I don't. I
Okay.
got that in there. But for the folks in the room, there's another organization that works in close proximity to zero abuse, and that is 1in6.org. Numeric 1, IN, numeric 6.org. 5 days a week, we run online support group. So guys can participate. They don't have to give their names. It's all by nickname. And it's for men who've experienced childhood sexual abuse or adult sexual assault. We make a distinction around those two words, but men who've experienced sexual harm in their life. And you can join these groups. They're peer support, and yet there's always a therapist in the room. And 101 topics can be explored. And what we generally encourage is guys to attend regularly to a day of the week, so that over time the guys get to know each other, even though everyone's identified by nickname. So there is mutual support, and at times we move into education, just like this webinar we're having right now. And many men find it very, very helpful in terms of being on their own healing journey. So if you're male identified and you want to check that out, please do. We'd love to have you free of charge, and it just might be a great thing in your life. So that's my pitch, Becky.
Great job. Great pitch. And since we have just a few minutes, would you like to talk about what your next Survivor Circle is going to be about?
Oh, yeah. Hey, okay. The next Survivor Circle is going to do kind of piggyback on this one. If you remember when I talked about the three shame pathways, um, we're going to be looking in detail of the shame pathway that is linked to men's anger, rage, and violence. So using a trauma lens, how do we make sense of that? And I'm going to say this is that most conventional means of engaging men on the subjects, they avoid the topic of past abuse, they avoid the topic of trauma, and instead, in the next webinar, we are going to put the trauma experience front and center and use that as our lens to understand why is it that men who are survivors have greater risk or proneness to rage and violence. Not all men, of course, but statistically higher than average. And if we take men who are, have a problem with anger, rage, and violence, maybe through research because they have been charged and convicted of those offenses, we find high numbers of men who have experienced childhood abuse. Not necessarily sexual abuse, but a variety of harms, physical abuse, emotional abuse, patterns of neglect, bullying, significant bullying in their life. All these can contribute to men's risk of rage and violence. So our next discussion will be just on that piece.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. And those will be coming up soon. Rick is going to offer them the same one back to back. So if there's a better time for you, you can choose one time or the other. The first one is March the 12th, which is a Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And it will be repeated again on March 14th, which is a Thursday at 12 p.m. noon Eastern. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for one of those, or if you really like it, join us for both.
Very true.
But thank you again so much, Rick. And for those of us who joined us today, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.